भारतीय रिझर्व्ह बँकेकडून रेपो रेटमध्ये 0.50% वाढ करण्यात आली आहे। ही सलग चौथी व्याजदर वाढ आहे। या वाढलेल्या व्याजदरामुळे सर्वसामान्यांना त्याचा फटका बसणार असून व्याजाच्या हप्त्यांमध्येही वाढ होण्याची शक्यता व्यक्त केली जाते। रिझर्व्ह बँकेचे गव्हर्नर शक्तिकांत दास यांनी ही घोषणा केली आहे। दरम्यान सध्याचा रेपो रेट दर हा 5.9 असून हा मागील 3 वर्षांमधील उच्चांक आहे।
About 67% of the decline in reserves during the current financial year is due to valuation changes arising from an appreciating US dollar and higher rates of higher US bond yields. Incidentally, there was an accretion of 4.6 billion US dollars to the foreign exchange reserves on BOP basis during the first quarter of the current financial year. So it may be seen that our market interventions continue to be judicious. India's other external sector indicators, namely the external debt to GDP ratio, net international investment position to GDP ratio, ratio of short term debt to reserves and debt service ratio also indicate lower vulnerability as compared with most other major EMEs. In fact, India's external debt to GDP ratio is the lowest among the emerging market economies. In fact, that's right. In the final analysis, we remain confident of meeting our external financing requirements comfortably. I shall now announce certain additional measures, and I'll be very brief. There are just about 4 or 5 announcements. The first is that we will release a discussion paper on expected loss based approach for loan loss provisioning by banks. Banks currently follow the incurred loss approach for provisioning of their loan assets, whereby provisions on loan assets are made after the stress has actually materialized. A more prudent and forward looking approach is the expected loss based approach, which requires banks to make provisions based on an assessment of the probable losses. As a step towards converging with globally accepted prudential norms, we will issue a discussion paper on the proposed transition for stakeholder comments. The second one relates to discussion paper on securitization of stressed asset framework. The revised framework for securitization of standard assets was issued by the Reserve Bank in September 2021. It has now been decided to introduce a framework for securitization of stressed assets. This will provide an alternative mechanism for securitization of NPAs in addition to the existing ARC route. A discussion paper on this proposed framework is also being issued for feedback from stakeholders. The third announcement relates to internet banking facility for customers of regional rural banks. Regional rural banks, that is RRBs, are currently allowed to provide internet banking facility to their customers subject to fulfillment of certain criteria. Keeping in view the need to promote the spread of digital banking in rural areas, these criteria are being rationalized. The revised guidelines will be issued separately. And the final announcement relates to regulation of offline payment aggregators. Online payment aggregators have been brought under the purview of the Reserve Bank guidelines since March 2020. It has now been proposed to extend these regulations to offline payment aggregators who handle proximity or face-to-face transactions. This measure is expected to bring in regulatory synergy and convergence on data standards. Let me now conclude. Daunting challenges confront us at this juncture. The underlying fundamentals of our economy and the buffers built over the years have stood us in good stead. We have taken a series of measures since April 2022, that is in the aftermath of the commencement of the conflict in Ukraine and the kind of spillovers and the global impact it produced. We have taken a series of measures thereafter since April 22 in the backdrop of, as I said, geopolitical tensions, sanctions and supply chain disruptions.